Hey folks, hope you're all doing well and welcome back to the channel. I wanted to do this show for the longest time talking about Gary Moore. He's one of those guitar players that doesn't get the notoriety that he should. And, he just should be in that conversation when people are talking about the Eddie Van Halens and the Jeff Becks and the Jimi Hendrixes and so on. He's just a phenomenal guitar player. And, I just wanted to do a show just talking about Gary Moore. So to help me in that endeavor, we got Mr. Pete Pardo, the busiest man on YouTube. How are you?
Doing good, Hack. How are you? I know it's all my fault. This show has been. We wanted to do this months ago, and we wanted to do it before the holidays. And I was sick throughout most of the holiday season with the flu and with the stomach virus, and it's just like,
oh God.
And now here we are in the middle of March, almost the end of March, and we're finally getting around to it. Better late than never, I say.
Better late than never. Yeah, it's funny because earlier today I was saying to you off air, just watching an interview with his son. So Jack Moore, his son, is also a guitar player with his own band, and he's out there performing as well. And they asked him about his dad, of course, in the interview, and he was saying how, that he was just like a sponge. Any style of music he heard, he could just play, jazz, rock, blues, and all that sort of thing, which really, again, kind of explains the breadth of what he did, because he went through a lot of stages. I mean, he of course he did the Coliseum 2 record, so he did the sort of the fusion-y thing there, and played with, earlier on he played with Skid Row. They were like, the Irish Cream, so to speak, for a while. He did that, and he's just gone through a lot of different stages. So there's quite a breadth of music that he's put out over the years, but it's all amazing.
An incredibly versatile guitar player. I think, I was just thinking, I'm like, what really didn't he do much of in his career? Never really dabbled all that much in acoustic music. A lot of like famous guitar players did like some acoustic stuff, and that was never his thing. He was mainly an electric guitar player, and one of the greatest of all time. And he has been, since the first time I heard one song off of Corridors of Power on the radio. I'd never heard anything else by him beforehand. Since that day, he has been a top 5 or top 3 guitar player for me, and he still is to this day. I absolutely love him. Why he wasn't a household name, I'll never really understand, because he's just an immense talent. And I love your thumbnail picture of him here. I mean, I've never seen this photograph, and it totally tells you all you need to know about Gary Moore. Eyes closed, mouth open, just like totally into what he's doing.
Yeah.
Plays with so much fire and feel and finesse, and a great technical player, a great feel player, amazing chops, amazing soulfulness. He's a really good singer too. So
great. Nobody talks about his vocals, but man, the guy could sing.
Yeah, and he was a really good singer.
There's not a lot of guitar players where you can kind of hear. Like when he played, it was so emotive. You could hear his personality coming out.
Right.
And there's not a lot of guitar players that can do that can kind of like, go from here right out, right through the hands and out the guitar. And he was one of those guys that he could just transport whatever was in his head would just come out of his hands, and so emotive. I mean, he could make the guitar freaking cry. And there's not a lot of guys. I mean, there's a lot of guys with, flashy, this and that, whatever, but that whole sort of connection between the mind and the fingers, there's not a lot of guys that can really do that,
Yeah, I mean, he could shred with the best of them, but he could play slower stuff with lots of bends and sustain, and like utilizing like feedback of the amp to extend notes and have them carry on forever. And so good. I'm sitting here, I'm getting chills just talking about it, because he's one of my favorite players of all time, and I find I can talk about him all day long because he means that much to me. And I still
Yeah.
remember, like, sometimes, like, when, we lose some of our heroes, you remember, like, where you were and what you were doing when you heard the news. And I remember my wife and I had gone in and spent a weekend in New York City just to go, hanging out, go to museums, go to some bars and nice restaurants, and took in a show or whatever. And I remember we were on the bus coming back, and we had just gotten back to the bus station here locally in town. And I looked at my phone and I saw that he had passed away. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was like, I just remember we had such a good weekend, and I was immediately just down and just
He
like,
was so young too, eh?
yeah,
Like, what was what,
he's younger than me now. I think he was
50?
57 or 58, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that's just what a shame, man. What a
yeah,
shame.
yeah.
But, so anyway, what we've decided to do is, pick what our five favorite, not necessarily the best, but our five favorite records. I mean, I'm sure our lists are going to be completely different because we talked about this earlier, and you came into Gary Moore at a different time than I came into Gary Moore, so that's definitely going to reflect in our choices. But
Yeah.
yeah, so let's go through the your favorite five records. So I mean, we'll just go back and forth. There's only the two of us, so what have you got for number five?
So again, there's a lot of different eras here, as you were talking about before.
Yeah,
But even it's just in his solo catalog, right? You got the early stuff, which is very well. The very early stuff is kind of bleeds over from the Coliseum 2 days. I didn't pick
yeah,
any Coliseum 2 albums because those are kind of like band efforts. I tried to stay with his solo stuff. His first like one or two solo records have a mix of hard rock and the fusiony stuff. And then he goes into this full bore into this hard rock, almost like heavy metal phase. Then he goes into does some Celtic stuff, and then he goes into the blues phase, and then he
big
does the
time.
album with Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce, almost like modern day Cream, and then he does a little bit of rock stuff again, does some
Yeah,
more blues, and so there's so much to choose from.
yeah.
I went with his God, what year was this? I believe this was 1985. Let me just 1985. It's a Run for Cover. This one right here. This is a weird one because a lot of places you read up on, they call this as kind of his breakthrough album. But this album, to my knowledge, didn't even get officially released here in the States. I had to buy this as an import, which is
Yeah,
really bizarre because the two albums that came before it kind of really broke him here in America.
they did. Yeah,
Not in a big way, but this is really good. It's I think the one thing about this record that is a little weird, and maybe it works against it, is that he's got like almost like a different lineup of musicians playing on like every song. But he's got Glenn Hughes singing on not quite half the album. And to me, if it wasn't for Glenn Hughes's like drug problems at the time, I think Glenn Hughes and Gary Moore would have made a fantastic team
oh
working
yeah,
together going forward because they sound fantastic together here. And in a way, I think it works out really well because I always thought that Gary's vocal style is very similar to Glenn's. He's not as good a singer, obviously,
mm,
but here has a mix of songs that they wrote together that Glenn sings, a couple that they sing together, and then you got other songs that Gary just sings that Glenn doesn't appear on. But it's got the title track is great. Reach for the Sky is terrific. You got Military Man. Okay, so you got
yeah,
Phil Lynott shows up on here as well.
yeah,
Empty Rooms, which was also on the album before it here in the States.
mm,
That was
yeah,
a kind of a big international hit. You got Out in the Fields, which is again with Phil, great
yeah,
song. And then Nothing to Lose, Once in a Lifetime, All Messed Up is a great rocker. It's got a couple ballady tracks, a couple more standard rock songs, some heavy stuff. It's really good. It's just weird because every song's got like different people on it, but I like it. I think it's really good, and it's held up quite well. So that's my number five. Really good album though.
cool, cool. So I'm just gonna kind of let the cat out of the bag here a little bit. So I came into Gary Moore when he went back to the blues. Okay, so that was my introduction. So that's gonna really inform my list. So, and I love him playing blues. So my first pick is literally Back to the Blues. So that came out in 2001. So he'd done a couple of 90s records, late 90s records, which I don't know. I mean, they're really kind of odd. It's like he was kind of trying to be contemporary. They're a little bit odd, those records, and some experimentation and stuff. I don't know, but he came back with a fury on this record. you know, I mean, it's a really heavy guitar record. There's some really fiery, but still blues soloing. So there's some straight up guitar stuff on here, but then they've got the horns and they got some organ going. The guitar tone is absolutely killer. He's back to Gibsons on this record after I think he played Gibsons as well in those 90s records, but you can really hear the Gibson tone coming through. He does a cover of Stormy Monday. Now everybody and their nephew has done Stormy Monday. Okay. Yeah, but I mean, him doing it is just his version is just like off the charts good. It's so good. There's a beautiful ballad on here, Picture of the Moon. It's got a really great vocal on it to go along with his amazing playing. And then you've got The Prophet. Now you got to check this song out. I think it's about 7 minutes. It's beautiful. It's very emotional. It's an instrumental. You can hear, and I was kind of saying earlier, like he's one of those guys that his emotion comes through in his playing. I mean, you can hear the guitar crying on this track. It's just gorgeous, just beautiful, But yeah, I mean, when he played blues, man, he played blues with not all the time. There were the slow, more mellower songs, but when he was like just fired up, man, it's just intense. The chops, the feel, the fire, the intensity, like it's all there. It's just incredible, incredible. But yeah, that's my number 5. Back to the Blues.
Even when he was doing straight blues stuff, it was so high energy.
Yeah,
I mean, nobody was playing blues like this guy,
no,
and it's just so explosive. His tone is just amazing.
Explosive. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. Whether he's playing because they show him on the cover, he's playing a 335, and I have seen live clips of him using, the semi hollow body guitars, but mostly he was playing Strats for a long time, and then Les Pauls for a long time. He played Charvels for a while too, but
earlier on.
Yeah, 80s. But no matter what guitars he was using, I mean, just amazing tone and just great stuff. My number 4, I'm going to go with 1983's, right? 1983, yeah, his third studio album, solo album, Dirty Fingers. It's amazing how some of these album covers are just fucking horrible.
Yeah, it's like they were just kind of like nobody so non-descriptive, kind of in the back of the shelf kind of records.
Yeah, they're just not good. And and a few of them, like you had like a different album cover for the States and in the UK, and they're all terrible. It's just like there's like no thought put into any of these. Anyway, this is his third one. Again, this I believe was only available here in the States as an import. Not just I found this later on. But he actually put together a really good band here. And what's interesting is like I think early on was not very confident in his singing ability. So he had Charlie Hune on lead vocals on this album. Of course, worked with Ted Nugent and sang with Foghat for many years. And he's also got in the band, he's got Tommy Aldridge on drums. He's got Don Airey on keyboards and Jimmy Bain on bass. It's a really good band, right? But of course,
really good band.
And some great songs on here. You got the rock. There's a good amount of hard rock on here. You got Hiroshima. You got Dirty Fingers, the title track, which is just like a solo, instrumental guitar piece, kind of like Eruption. You got a cover of Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, right? An Old Animals classic. And then he does a version of Nuclear Attack, which is a song that he recorded with Greg Lake on Greg Lake's first solo record.
Oh, okay.
Amazing on there. And he even ups it, the ante on here. It's even heavier. You got Really Gonna Rock Tonight. Some good rockers on here. Lonely Nights is more of that little ballad. He does a lot of these kind of like pop ballads on these albums. Kidnapped is another great track. Molten guitar tone on here. Some of these albums productions, not great, but okay. But man, his guitar playing always sounds incredible. So yeah, really good album. Maybe there's a lot of people out there who have not heard this one. It's well worth.
Probably not. Yeah, that's not a very well-known record.
Yeah, it's a good one.
All right, so kind of following along the same thread for me, my number 4 is another blues record, Power of the Blues 2004. So this was the follow-up to Back to the Blues. Similar type record, heavy guitar, aggressive blues playing. I mean, there's some standout tracks here. There's a song called There's a Hole, which is an absolutely killer riff. I mean, it's more of a rock tune really than a blues tune, But what I really dig here is I love when he does covers, right? So he does a cover here, If I Can't Quit You Baby, which, you know, probably most people are familiar with the Led Zeppelin version. But man, this he blows the roof off of this song. I mean, the guy's on fire. His solo's intense. Like he's just ripping, and then and then he rips, and then he's got the slow passages and he rips. But there's all this intensity that comes out in his playing. It's just so good. Another great track on here, Getaway Blues, is really cool. He does a little bit of wah on action on Memory Pain. There's a few slower songs on here, like Torn Aside, where he plays a little bit less, a little more less intense, but still, man, with so much feeling that it's like, man, he just transports you, like with his playing. I mean, he the whole package. The guy's the whole package. He's got the chops, he's got the intensity, but he also has that emotive thing that you can feel every note he's playing. And who does that? You know what I mean? Like you can count on one hand the guys who can do that, and he's just one of them. And yeah, Power to the Blues. And I got to say, both these records, you're mentioning production earlier, they both sound fantastic. They're both
I think
really
his
good
blues
sounding
albums have better production than his more rock and metal stuff.
Yeah. Sure. Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. And again, the guitar tone is like, man, it's to die for. It's just phenomenal. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think we could probably say this about a lot of guys that came from this era, but you listen to his style and you think, all right, well, who influenced him? Like, I think he got a lot from Clapton early on, and maybe specifically Clapton from the Blues Breakers and certainly Cream and probably like B.B. King and a couple of those old blues guys. But otherwise, he's very original sounding. But you think about who he influenced. I mean, you don't have John Sykes like we remember John Sykes without Gary Moore. You don't have John Norum from Europe without Gary Moore.
You don't have Joe Bonamassa without Gary Moore.
Absolutely. Yeah. And he's one of those guys, I think, that's, even though he's not a household name, he influenced so many other guys who are household names for the most part. So that's kind of sad, but that happens all the time, right? So
yeah.
All right, my number 3 is his first. It's not truly his first, because he did have an album called Grinding Stone under the Gary Moore band earlier on. But his first actual Gary Moore solo album was Back on the Streets from 1978. Again, not a great album cover, but a really cool album. And on this album, he's got a pretty cool band. He's got Simon Phillips play some drums on the album, Brian Downey from Thin Lizzy, because he was in Thin Lizzy right around this time briefly, on drums, John Mole on bass guitar, Don Airey on keyboards, and Mr. Phil Lynott appearing on bass and some vocals on this album as well. So here we got some fast and furious rockers, like the title track is on here. You got Fanatical Fascists on here. You got The Great Parisian Walkways on here, which probably is one of his great guitar moments ever.
Yeah.
It's so good. You got the incredible, so there's 2 instrumentals on here that are basically kind of, if you love the Coliseum 2 stuff, you'll love this. You got Flight of the Snow Moose, which is just absolutely ridiculous. It's just so good. And then What Would You Rather Be? Would you rather be or a mouse or a wasp or something like that? What Would You Rather Be or a Wasp? Which is a ridiculous title, but it's a great instrumental nonetheless. It's raw, it's rocking, it's fusiony. It's a great guitar excursion for him, and probably one of his great, kind of unknown albums, because this was released with little fanfare. So if you're kind of just dabbling into Gary Moore and you stumble upon his Coliseum 2 stuff, which is brilliant, and you want to hear a little bit more of that, you get a little bit of that on this album. This is probably the last time where he dabbles into the fusion stuff, but this is where he's got the hard rock bug. So he gets it on here. Maybe he got it in Thin Lizzy, but then he goes forward from here with it. But really good album, Back on the Streets.
Yeah, that's kind of like when I hear that, it's sort of like, he's got his foot in sort of both camps.
In a couple places, yeah.
And he's kind of, it's almost like a transitional thing where, the next records are going to be more on the, like you say, the heavy rock side. But it's a good record. It's a good record. Okay, well, so my number 3 is the record that turned me on to Gary Moore. Like a lot of people, his sort of second career, if you will, and it's still got the blues.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Man, I heard that, and I was playing with a blues band at the time, and we were covering a lot of these songs. Pretty Woman. For one, um, this was my introduction. I was a huge SRV fan, but I'd never heard anybody playing the blues with that much, with heavy guitars and that sort of rock attitude. So this was like, you know, just kind of blew me away. I mean, that being said, there's the more sort of tamer, traditional songs on this, and the production on this compared to the other two that I mentioned is a little more tame. But it's a good mix of both. He's doing the traditional blues thing. He's singing and he's playing a lick. He sings and he plays, the whole typical thing. Killer Les Paul tone on this. This is Greeny. This is Greeny on this record. I'm pretty damn sure he played Greeny on here. He's got Albert King and Albert Collins on here, where he trades solos with them, which is kind of funny, right? Because you'll hear this sort of like this little clean guitar fill here and there, right? And then in comes Gary with his amped up Les Paul and just obliterates
Everything. Yep. Like the chainsaw comes in. It's just like, oh man.
There's a video, and I can't find it, but I've seen it, and where he was doing a show, and he brought these guys out, and he was playing with them, like BB King. I can't remember if Albert Collins, but I remember not Albert Collins. Albert Collins, I remember him playing. I don't remember Albert King being there, and they were doing the same thing. And I remember specifically him with BB King, and they were trading, right? So BB King would play something, and then Gary would rip your face off. You know what I mean? It was like Davy and Goliath, going.
It's so different, right? It's like from two different worlds.
Yeah. Like this guy's on 10, and this guy's just playing real traditional. But that being said, I mean, that just speaks to like how powerful these guys are. That they just know how to emote. That BB King can play a little 3-note thing, and it's equivalent to Gary's like ripping through a bunch of notes, right? So. But anyways, the big hit on here, of course, is Still Got the Blues, which reminds me a lot. You mentioned Parisian Walkways. I always found those kind of, similar vibes and similar songs, the two of them. But, of his blues records, like this is my favorite because this is the first one I heard. And, it's just one of those records you can just sit back, relax, and listen. And you're going to hear some amazing playing and, and even if you're, because I mean, I'm not a huge blues fan. Okay. I'll say that outright. I mean, there's certain guys that I can dig. Like I mentioned Stevie Ray Vaughan, because it's a 1-4-5-1, it gets a little repetitive and I get that. Right. But when you hear it done at a very high level, like I mentioned Stevie Ray Vaughan and then of course, Gary Moore, like, I can listen to that stuff all day long. I just absolutely love it, just for what these guys are doing with this, relatively simple form, but all the juice they can squeeze out of these songs, in their playing and their lead playing and everything. It always impresses the hell out of me. Billy Gibbons will be another one I'll throw into that pile.
For sure.
Sure. I love hearing guys who can do it very, very well, and he was definitely one of them. So that's my number 3. Still Got the Blues.
That title track was all over the radio when that.
Man,
I remember thinking, God, finally this guy gets played on the radio a little bit, right?
Yeah,
he deserved it. It's just
and on that video I was mentioning, like when he plays that song and then he goes off. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Man, he squeezes every possible melodic thing you could think of. He just
that whole second half of the second solo, right?
Oh, he just squeezes everything out of that song. You're like, oh my God. And he's going, it's like the guy just an endless flow of ideas, like just from his head to his hands, just takes you on
I
a
love
trip,
when he
man.
hits a note and he just lets it sustain for like minutes.
Oh,
I love that, right? And
yeah.
he waits, and then the feedback comes, and you're like, oh man, it's so good. It's chills down your spine, right? It's like, oh my God.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah.
All right, my number two is 1984's Victims of the
Ah,
Future. Again, this is the UK cover, which is terrible, and the
yeah,
US cover was just as bad. It was like a smoldering, fiery city with this terrible artwork, and it's like, what is this all about? But a great album. And on this album, he's got Neil Carter on keyboards and lead and backing vocals, who played with him for quite a while. Neil
yeah,
Young on bass, Mo Foster on bass, Bob Daisley on bass, Ian Pace on drums, Bobby Cuisinart on drums. So he's got a good cast of characters on here as well. There's slightly different track sequencing from the UK and the US version, but it's pretty much the same. This is just molten. I
yeah,
dare say call it metal. It's hard
yeah,
rock, but it's like more metallic than that. The title track is just face melting stuff. It's so good. Teenage Idol is Fast and Furious. Shapes of Things to Come is a great cover. They played that a lot on the radio here when this first came out. So good. I mean, just so good. I normally am not a big fan of covers, but he does it justice, and it's different. That's what I love about it. It's like a heavy metal cover of Shapes of Things. So good.
yeah.
Empty Rooms is on here, right? That should have been
Again,
an enormous hit for him. Murder
hmm
in the Skies is total metal. Hold On to Love, All I Want, Law of the Jungle. And I think in the U.S., what was the song that we got here? Because there was we got Devil in Her Heart was on the version that we got here in the States, and that's like another metal rocker. Really good, great album. Probably it
yeah,
probably would be my number one if it wasn't for my number one. But I really love this one a lot, and I played it to death back in the day, and I still love listening to it. So it's great. If you want like heavy metal Gary Moore, that's probably
yeah.
as close as you're going to get. That album right there.
That's definitely his heaviest record, no doubt. Yeah. So my number two. So now I'm switching gears here. I'm going to the rock. Corridors of Power. 1982. This is like your 80s melodic rock. This is Gary trying to get on the radio. But fortunately, there's enough heavy moments on this to keep it from being Bon Jovi. Right? You know, he's got, I mean, there is some, like Always Gonna Love You is a little bit much. But then he's got a cover of Wishing Well on here, which is just, again, the covers, right? But man, he does them so well and so heavy. It's just, it's a fantastic version. Gonna break my heart again, still heavy enough to be cool. And then you got End of the World, and he starts it off with just, it's Gary. I call it Gary Moore's eruption. He's just like doing all the really fast, playing and all that, kind of showing off his chops, showing that, he can compete with all the shredders of the day because it was 1982, and the song is killer. It's the heaviest song on here. Really, really cool. Then he's got another track that I dig. I Can't Wait Till Tomorrow, which is a ballady song, but this is my favorite ballad of his. I don't like all his. Some of them kind of on this record they kind of lean a little bit too much on the cheese side, but this one is really good. The solo's absolutely beautiful. It's melodic. It's intense. Chops, yes, but still so musical, right? So musical. So, I'm not a big fan of like the 80s sort of trying to get on the radio type, I mentioned Bon Jovi, but he's playing and his intensity makes up for it. And it's still got enough moments on here that I think this is a really, really good 80s record. So, yeah, there you go.
It's my number one.
I knew it's your number
First one
one.
I heard, and
See?
I was just blown away by this guy. And the
Yeah,
song that I heard on the radio was "Always Gonna Love You," and I remember hearing this song. It's got the piano, it's got Don Eric,
yeah,
and they're like, okay, whatever. I'm thinking all of a sudden that solo comes in, and I'm like,
yeah,
what in the world? Who is this guy, right? And I
yeah.
remember waiting until the song was over, and I had to hear one more song after that for the DJ to come on and say who that was, and I'm like, I need to go out and get that. And I went out to the store and I found it. Did not have this cover. It had the purple cover, him standing with the purple light all around him with the Les Paul. Here he's playing the Strat, right? But Don't Take Me for a Loser is awesome.
Yes, that's a good one.
Now, I had never listened to Free before I bought this album. So to me, Wishing Well was like a Gary Moore song. I had no idea it was a
Okay.
song by another band. And it's again, I'm not really into covers. So maybe if I was already really familiar with Free, I would have, said, all right, it's a good cover, but I like the original. this is a really good cover. Now
It
that I know
is.
me really, really well. Falling in Love with You is kind of like the schmaltzy ballad on here, but it still has a good guitar solo. And I used to, when
That's
I
a
was younger,
saving grace, right? His guitar solo.
every girl that I dated that I made a mixtape for back in the day, I used to put that on there, right? So, End of the World is just absolutely incredible. I mean, that
Molten.
shredding solo to begin with, the riff, the whole song is so heavy. And I remember like the first time I heard the middle solo on there where he does the air siren, on with the whammy bar, and I'm just like, what? Nobody's ever done
Yeah.
that before, right?
That's
And it's just
Hendrix, man. That's Hendrix right there.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
so amazing.
Yeah.
And Rockin' Every Night is great, Cold Hearted is great, and I absolutely love I Can't Wait Until Tomorrow. Absolutely love it. The closing solo on that is so good.
Yes.
And I hate that it fades away because you just want to hear more. He's like
More.
totally going off and they just fade it. And I'm like, go on. I want to hear another 2 minutes of
Yeah.
that. So good.
Yeah.
I love this album to death. And I still listen to it and it just brings back such good memories. And yeah, it's a little poppy in spots, but even the poppy stuff has great guitars on it. And his tone is just killer on here.
Yeah.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And it's so funny, Hack. I always tell the story about how I only got to see him live once. And I got to see him live at the end of the 80s when he was doing the After the War tour, which was really his last big hard rock album. And I saw him at a club here locally in the Hudson Valley. And I remember my girlfriend at the time and I got so drunk that like she was like getting sick during the show and I had to take her outside and
Oh
to
shit.
the car. And I wound up missing half the show. And honestly, I don't remember anything about it. I don't remember
That's
anything about it at all. And I'm like, that sucks, because one of
never
my
seen him
favorite players.
live.
Yeah, it's like, it's like
Never seen him live.
I have no memory of the show other than dealing with her the whole
Yeah.
time. And that's it. So it's like, yeah. And now he's gone. It's like, I should have got to see him during the blues years because I had plenty of opportunities. I just didn't go. So
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, my number one is your number two.
there you go.
Victims of the
We
Future.
have the two right ones at 1 and 2. That's all that matters.
Yeah, yeah, we did. Yeah. I mean, this is definitely his heaviest record. It's not I like it because it's not as commercial as Corridor. The focus is more heavy on this record for sure. Starts off with that killer title track that you mentioned, chunky guitars, and always with the nice catchy choruses, even when it's heavy.
Yeah.
He's always got a nice catchy chorus. But man, you mentioned Shapes of Things. I love this cover. It is bombastic. It's like he does this song to the teeth. Absolutely ferocious. The solo, his vocals getting right up there at the end when he's belting it. Absolutely killer, man. I mean, the guys can sing and he's got some freaking range, man, to do that, Then you got Murder in the Skies, another Gary Moore eruption, another big, guitar solo thing at the beginning, and then it's just, crushing heavy track, also with a really catchy chorus. The only song on here that's kind of maybe a little too slick for me is Hold On to Love. That's a little bit too slick.
Yeah,
but
it's not one of the most successful songs on here.
Yeah. But The Empty Rooms, I mean, it's a ballad, but it's a really good ballad. And it shows like he's a really good songwriter. It's such a well-crafted song. You know what I mean? It should have been massive. And the guitar solo, like you mentioned, is so emotive. It's a beautiful song, well-constructed song, better than 90% of the crap you hear on the radio. That should have been on the radio, but it is what it is. So there you go.
So I've talked about this numerous times over the years on my channel, and I don't know if I've ever mentioned it to you or anybody watching here, so I'm going to mention it now. I religiously, almost every single year, I watch a certain video on YouTube, which is a clip from Empty Rooms live in 1987 in Stockholm, Sweden.
Yeah.
It's roughly 12 minutes, right? It's like a 12-minute solo. So Empty Rooms was like I guess they expanded it to like 15 minutes. And most of it is this absolutely jaw-droppingly amazing guitar solo from Gary that literally brings tear to my eyes every time I watch it, just because it's just so incredible. So I urge folks, if you're watching, just do a YouTube search, and go Gary Moore, Empty Rooms, live in Stockholm, 1987. You will be absolutely blown away. It is amazing. I watch it every year at least once, and I just
Yeah.
watch every second of it. And I just sit there and I get a tear in my eyes, and I'm like, God, this guy was amazing. He's so missed, so amazing.
Yeah, you turned me on to that, and I sent you a video not too long ago of another clip that actually a full show that of his, and it was somewhere in Europe, and I can't remember where
Yeah.
it was, so I can't even tell people to go watch it.
He played
But
festivals over there all the time, and yeah, he was a
yeah,
big draw over there. Yeah.
yeah, and the whole show he played a Les Paul Jr. The whole show, a tobacco burst Les Paul Jr. I can't remember if it was just like one P90 on it, but I mean, that's all he needs.
And what's funny in that video, that guitar looks so tiny because he had really big hands. So it looked like this little miniature thing. You know, we used to make jokes back in the day. You know, Leslie West used to play a Les Paul Jr. and Leslie was a big dude, right? But Gary, not that big of a guy, but had really big hands. And that guitar looked like a little miniature on him. But yeah, he playing with fire, boy, I tell you.
Yeah, I mean, he could slay with any guitar. It didn't matter what it was. He didn't need the whammy bar, didn't need any of that stuff. Just pure energy and intensity, and oh man, just unbelievable.
Great player.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, I want to thank folks for watching. Pete, is anything you want to mention? This is going to air tomorrow, so.
Oh, cool. On Friday. All right. Yeah, we've got coming up on the channel tomorrow. We've got myself, Simon Bray, and Stephen Reed, otherwise known as the UK Connection, doing a fun show talking about albums in our collection that, like, we go and we look at them on the shelf and we're like, I don't even know what that album is, why I have it, or what it's all about, right? So we've each picked out 5 albums that we are pretty clueless about. We go and we re-listen, and we're going to talk about them and see if we can figure out why we own them and should we even keep them anymore. So that's coming up on tomorrow, on Saturday. And then Sunday, I will be getting together with Grant Arthur to rank the albums of Loggins and Messina. So that's coming up on Sunday. So some cool stuff.
Cool. And stay tuned for myself, Pete, and Martin doing a show this coming Thursday. So the 26th, no, the 27th, I think.
27th.
Anyway, it'll be next Thursday. So that'll be an
sequel to last month's show. So last month was very popular. We're back again. So yeah.
Yeah, it's very popular. So this will be part 2 of that. So look for that. So hang on a second, Pete. Just gonna say goodbye to everybody. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Cheers.